Broadcasting from Earth Space Dock, this is PoliTreks.
The Prime Directive, the Declaration of Human Rights, the United Federation of Planets, the United Nations, World War II, the Dominion Federation War, the Art of War, the Teachings of Sirach, Jesus Christ, Kalis the Unforgettable.
Welcome, everyone, to PoliTreks. My name is Barry, and it's been a while. And with me, as always, is my often imitated, never replicated co-host, Mr. Shashank Avaru. How are you doing today, Shashank?
Namaste, Homo sapiens. I am doing as well as can be expected in the reality that we are living in.
Yeah,
How are you, Barry?
It's a brand new reality, and it's nice to be back, and it's nice to be chatting with you, Shashank. We took a bit of a impromptu, almost full year off, the two of us, with moves and changes and all of these different things that happened over 2020, and we're happy that 2020 is over. And well, wouldn't you know it, 2021 is off to quite the interesting start, isn't it?
Yeah, and if any of this is stuff that you don't want to share about, you can cut it out. But we are both people who work in education, and our jobs are considered essential. So I don't know how big of a break Barry got. I think I got 1 month to work from home, but then I was right back on the road, back in the office. It's been a pretty crazy few months, and then I had to move. I don't live where I used to live anymore, and it's in a good way. It was a positive move that worked out for me, but. And Barry's life has just been, it's been a roller coaster. So, I mean, we're happy to be back. We apologize for being away. We hope you're still listening, and we hope you'll consider listening to us. We promise we'll definitely try much, much harder this year to keep at least some kind of a schedule so we can keep coming back to talk to you.
The good thing about I find the Star Trek fandom is there's a lot of really great podcasts out there. So I'm loath to think anyone was terribly bored without us. But we hope to add to that delightful symphony of creativity that exists on the interwebs and podcast pages out there. As you know, some of you know, I guess, my brother passed away this time last year, and that sort of put things on a bit of a hold. It was about the time that we were interviewing Amrit Kaur back a year ago, this time last year, before kind of everything went down there. And it was just probably the best decision for me to take a bit of a break. Now, of course, we still deal with the old Canadian internet, as we jokingly will say, and sometimes that will slow us down a bit. But teaching in COVID, as Shashank said, has been very interesting. And I think maybe to tell you all some of the things that we're going to talk about in this episode this is sort of Shashank and me getting a chance to catch up with one another a little bit too. And I think that's pretty great. But talking maybe a little bit about what teaching during COVID is like. I've made a few Star Trek references and connections over the last little while. And then maybe talking a bit about some of the recent political upheaval that has taken place over the last couple of weeks here. And we are still recording this just before the January 20th inauguration day. So anything that we say beyond this is predictive. So by the time this gets released, I'm hopeful before inauguration. And if not, this will be an interesting way to check and see how accurate we were. So yes, with that, I think beyond there, I might want to talk to Shashank and workshop a couple of ideas I've got sort of going in my head right now, and some things that maybe even we could get some people to respond to us on what they might be interested in. You can always find us on Twitter at PoliTreks. And of course, we are a part of the Trek Geeks Podcast Network, a proud member that we've been a part of for a while and haven't made a lot of new content on, but we do have a lot of old content that you can always check around. And then, of course, Bill and Dan have their long-standing podcast, and then there's so many other wonderful podcasts that have shown up while we were taking our much-needed break. Shashank, why don't you take us through the list?
Sure. There is Star Trek Trek Rewind, and then there is Deep Space Pride, which is a new podcast that has debuted since we last did an episode for you guys here at PoliTreks. It's one I've been really enjoying. There is the 5-Year Mission podcast, and there is that afterthought that you kind of have to mention, like the Trek Geek Show.
Oh yeah.
But the other shows are really good. But the Trek Geek Show, it's like the tag that comes with your clothes when you buy them. You just have to tear them out and throw them away.
There you
And then
go.
you just have to bring them home for the barcode scanning purposes so you can pay for it.
And are we allowed to talk about the Divine Treasury yet?
I'm sure we can mention it. I mean, they did put content up in their YouTube channel.
Okay.
So yeah,
Cool.
you can
Well,
also subscribe to the Trek Geeks YouTube channel, where we have a different kind of a show. It's a show dedicated to Star Trek collectibles. So they already have my attention, but they did do a couple of episodes that they put up on the Trek Geeks YouTube channel that you can also check out.
Nice. And that's kind of where I'm interested. I might have some things that I can help them like auction off for a good cause. That would be kind of neat. I'm trying to downsize a little bit, and there's some trinkets here that I know just maybe I could sell them to. We'll see. Anyways, I'm sure we've all been sort of reeling from the year now, it has been almost, of having life in a lockdown under COVID. And I have to say, it's almost impossible to explain just how much life has changed. And I think for most of us, we can say that that's pretty much a true fact. But teaching during COVID has been a very interesting thing. Sort of, as Shashank, you said, working from home kind of gave us some time to ourselves. And I definitely did take that time, but I did find that I was still quite busy. It's just in a very different way. And I guess to some degree, and now that I wear like computer glasses and stuff like that, to some degree, I was able to kind of trek out my experience a little bit. There was a point where with my school division specifically, we actually taught from our classrooms in empty classrooms and then videoed home. And that was really kind of neat because I was able to set up an entire kind of Star Trek-like system where I had a big screen, sort of a view screen in front of me with my TV that I have in my classroom, and then my desktop in front of me, which is kind of like a console. And then I had to my side a camera. And then I had access to my whiteboard, and I could put up slides, and I could do all these different things. And I don't know, as much as it was difficult not being in the same room as the kids, I actually quite enjoyed it and would go back to that gladly if it meant safety was being upheld. But it's been kind of difficult knowing how to plan one's year, not knowing when you're going to be teaching from home and when you're going to be teaching in front of a bunch of students. I don't know if that's kind of been your experience, obviously in relation to what you do specifically in terms of online IT curriculum work and stuff.
It's been an interesting experience just watching the education part of educational technology work from you guys' end, because everything you knew about education in a way, especially for kids, kind of has gone out of the window, because most of it depends on the teacher and the student being there, right? So it's just been very interesting watching how education has worked in the educational technology part, because everything you knew about education, especially teaching someone who's not an adult, who gets their life experiences from that school environment where people are there, and I get to watch you do it and experience things from your end, and also my mom back home who's doing it in a much smaller scale with a much less skeletal framework. There are days when there is no Wi-Fi, and you do a phone call, and then you try to get the kids on a phone call, see how that goes. So it's been very interesting watching how kids and teachers and people in education are taking it. The challenges at my work have been kind of different, because your work is still virtual, because it's stuff that you do on computers, but you come to realize how important every person in the team is and why we're called essential. Because if XYZ don't show up for work in a week, a school that is in a district like 300 miles from us goes down, and like they don't have their servers running or their machines up that they can use. So it's just been a very interesting challenge watching everything going the way it's going. And kids pick the best time, because a lot of schools have been getting a lot of cyber attacks here in our state,
really?
And also in our country, and it's mostly being done by like either the kids in that school district or kids that have banded together online because they're at home there, and they kind of, if you're technologically capable and you're not using your skills in the right way, it's not that hard to. They're not all Pentagon servers, they're all servers that you run with people that come into a job and go home like any other servant. So it's just, there have been a lot of challenges. I've seen a lot of cyber attacks. That's been very interesting. And of course, the move and the commute has changed for me a little. The move was great, but the commute is now longer. I have to drive longer, which kind of changes things. So you also need to be in a really stable emotional place to be able to sit down and do a podcast for an hour or an hour and a half, because the people listening, you want them to have fun and have a good time, and you don't want nobody's going to tune in if you're going to talk about, remember that episode in Star Trek where they had a really long drive to work? But
I guess like that's what I did a lot of was in this state of not really being in the mood to do much podcasting. I did watch a butt ton of Star Trek, and I really kind of sprinkled around as much as I could. And then I also have a very long commute, and so I was able to listen to some Star Trek podcasts here and there, even the aforementioned one with Dan and Bill.
I'm glad you didn't crash.
Yeah.
But hey, we're here now. We are really, really sorry. We hope you're still listening. And if you're not, you're new, hey, jump in. It's kind of new for us too. Yeah. So we're figuring it out. Figure it out with us. And we hope you listen and have a good time.
I think it's interesting for you to bring up the idea of cybersecurity and everything, because that is something that came up with me. And, being that we are a sci-fi podcast, we can kind of talk about this in that sense. Is, you think about the more recent iteration of Star Trek under Discovery. So spoiler alert, we're going to talk about some elements. I'm not going to say everything, but in that respect, the idea that you can move information, right, from one holographic display to another by grabbing it and sort of tossing it in one direction. I think that was really interesting, and something that, again, I think we can start seeing a necessity for not only imagining, but now making it real, right? I think those kinds of things would have been really helpful as a teacher working in IT, or working internet technology wise, right? I'm not trained to teach online or anything, but I did for the last little while. One thing I noticed was those little moments that bog you down, that slow you down. And I guess being a Star Trek fan, I'm like, well, I know what the solution is we need some kind of technology that you can grab and pull and move things from one connected piece to another. And I guess like I started thinking about what's that going to look like for the future of education, especially considering the fact that it's pretty much undeniably clear at this point that both your and my countries have pretty much failed in their management of the COVID crisis, unfortunately. And we, I think, are going to be dealing with rolling lockdowns and quarantines and stuff for the foreseeable future, right? Until we can get the vaccination out, which again, also is, for me, not really 100% considering how many crazy people there are, how this is going to look coming up for education and for educators. We've sort of had our second throw at it where I'm at, and it definitely went considerably better. But we were sort of expecting this week coming back from Christmas holidays that we were going to melt the servers or something like that, because everyone was going online. And I do have to say, where I live, when a lot of people are streaming on the internet, things get a little janky. And like I would have kids who drop from their calls a lot, all this sort of stuff. And I think that that would probably be the next step in sci-fi that I would like to see in Star Trek, is dealing with really like an episode where like one really bad connection affects like something really major, like where someone like glitches out or their version of Star Trek Wi-Fi drops. So I guess those are sort of things to think about is and for anyone listening, like, what do you think the implications of all of this online teaching is going to do? How can we kind of get ahead of it and make sure that education is being prioritized for the right people, and everything like that we don't see a stratification between the educated individuals and stuff like that. And then finally, like, does this actually mean that like we can maybe look at how work is differently too? Because not everyone who listens to this podcast is in education. And I'm sure, aside from being considered the tech person just because you like Star Trek, the other really big thing is, because you like Star Trek, what can you imagine for how work is going to look like moving forward? Like, a lot of people work from home and are still doing a fine job of it. So does that change our relationship to work, I wonder?
It's been interesting watching all of this unravel too, because in March, back when everything kind of hit the fan, everybody was locked into it being a COVID issue. And we thought, okay, there is a pandemic, it is killing people, we have to figure it out. Eventually, a B story kind of started rolling up, which turned into like the way people are managing the pandemic, truth about the pandemic, facts about the pandemic, keeping people safe, what is safe, what isn't safe, why should I accept that that is safe, and how is any of this factually accurate. And for the longest time, you kind of don't think about it until it hits you. For the longest time, I always, whenever I watch Star Trek episodes, I would, especially the original series did this really well. They would always have what you'd call an A story and a B story. So you have to kind of save Kirk when he's on the planet, but also there's a giant rock in your way. And you have to figure out how amongst the ship, whether Scotty's going to be okay if Spock shoots at the rock. And like, it's just, you think, I always thought, why do they need to, like, why can't it just be the one thing that we're all logged in on? And clearly you've seen the way life works is, of course, it's never the one thing. There was COVID in March, and by June, July, August, people were like, well, I'm not going to wear a mask. What are you going to do about it? And there are people who said, oh, nobody can trust what's going on. COVID is fake, like it's not a real thing. And then it became so much bigger because, for better or for worse, it was humans handling it. So of course we had to confront COVID's chaos, not with a sense of peace, but saying, I can one up you. It was like COVID-19 came in and said, I'm going to disrupt all your lives. And then humanity was like, hold my beer, hold my Romulan ale. And then they just went at it. So it's just like completely unraveled. And it's like watching a train accident. Like, it's so, you don't want to watch it. It's horrible, but it's also so unique that you can't make it up, and mesmerizing in a weird way that you just have to take it all in. And that's just everywhere, man. That's schools, that's a lot of workplaces. Now, a lot of my friends who work in IT but not in education, most of them got to work from home, are still getting to work from home. Some of them get to work from home in all of 2021 and beyond. There are some companies who just straight up made their offices virtual. And that brings up a whole new set of challenges that thankfully you and I don't have to face, because we still kind of get to go out and see people every day. And we have interactions that is with a three-dimensional person and not a flat screen, right? But that also brings its own challenges, which is you don't have the things you do to unwind from work because everything is shut down, but your work is not shut down. And in a weird way, your work has gotten harder. So it's like the Enterprise crashed, you're on the planet, Spock has a spear in his right where his liver is supposed to be, and then Crawl comes. Like, it's all happening at the same time, very much like an A story and B story colliding. So it's just like a very, very, very challenging time.
I like your B plot idea, but I think, to some degree, the B plot is unfortunately taken over. I think that one of the biggest problems, and something that I think we don't get in Star Trek, is people do things on the ship when they're ordered to, whether they agree or disagree or whatever they think about it, right? There's a certain chain of command and something. And I think to some degree that's been lost inside of American, Canadian, and Western culture specifically, in that people mistake inconvenience for injustice in a lot of cases. And I do think that with COVID now being a reality that is worldwide, and it is world historic, right? It's affected our economy, it's affected our populations, it's affecting us more so, and it will affect our future, you're right. And I guess to some degree, maybe there are some people who, like our beloved canonistas in Star Trek, who try to argue that Discovery isn't canon and all this sort of stuff. I worry that to some degree they're arguing that COVID isn't canon. And in the real sense of it, they're getting bitten in the ass pretty hard by it, and I don't like to say it in that respect. But one other piece that I think we as Star Trek fans have to think about specifically is, how does this affect the whole, right? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And these few people, who are many in some cases, but fewer, I think, in population totally, the ones who actually want COVID to not be a thing and pretend that it's some kind of fakery, are very similar to the people who, attacked the Capitol recently. And I think that in that respect, we can maybe draw a bit of a through line between what exactly these people are after and what they're angry about. So if you don't mind, Shashank, maybe I can start everyone off just talking a little bit about where things are at right now, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of chime in, and then maybe we can start making some connections between what exactly we're dealing with. To some degree, people wonder if this is sort of a realistic version of Deep Space Nine getting taken over by the Dominion for a short period of time. But I mean, the least I can say for the Dominion is at least they didn't shit on the Senate floor. So when they took over Deep Space Nine. But I want to dive into that a little bit more and start to think about what exactly we can tie to philosophically from Star Trek, but then also maybe put a little bit of practicality towards what some of these implications might be. So first of all, everyone's aware at this point, I'm sure, if you have, unless you've been somewhere stuck on a deep space platform, you're aware that on January the 6th, a group of mostly upper middle class business owners, groups of people who you wouldn't normally see necessarily doing sort of large mass protest in front of a Capitol building like this specifically, amass and basically take over the Capitol for a short period of time. 5 people died, one of whom was a police officer who was knocked out by a fire extinguisher and was then beaten to death with instruments like the American flag, for instance. And then after that, we did hear of one individual who was shot, and then the other deaths were from medical emergencies, as far as I recall. One other thing that we did notice as well is that there were elements of the police who actually let people in to the Capitol building. There's video evidence of them removing barricades and allowing these people to come in. And so as we're talking about the world historic change that COVID has caused with the way we interact with each other, businesses, all of these other sorts of things, I think this is something of a bit of a culmination that is now going to set a new precedent, unfortunately. And like I said, we're recording this before January the 20th. So maybe I'll start there, Shashank. What was your impression when you saw what happened on the 6th? And then what are you thinking? What are your worries? What are your hopes? What do you think about January the 20th?
On that day, work was extra intense. Work is always intense in a good way because you like doing a good job. You kind of apply yourself and put yourself in it, try to put everything away. So the time I had logged on to check what was going on, I think I was on Twitter, and I saw the word insurrection trending. That was the first thing I saw. I was like, finally, people are talking about Star Trek Insurrection. I am ready. I have so many points. The soundtrack, the acting, the plot is really much smarter than you think it is. I was ready to break it down.
It's a great episode of Star Trek. It might not necessarily be entertaining cinema for your average cinema goers, but Trek-wise, it's fun.
Yeah, it's like the Star Trek Beyond of the TNG movies to me. That's the way I look at it.
That's fair.
So I was
absolutely fair.
I was ready to just
an enjoyable movie.
I was ready to hit them with facts and really smart opinions, and then I saw why Insurrection was trending. It was just you cannot say this is surprising. I don't know to who this was surprising.
Yeah,
it's shocking because it happened and we were able to record it and watch it unfold. It's wrong, and the audacity of it scares people. But we told you that when the guy came down the elevator and said Mexicans are rapists. People who were talking about this stuff said, hey, maybe not elect the guy who's saying that stuff. And then it's I'm sorry for making office reference, but it was the episode in which Pam finds out that Michael Scott is dating her mom, and she's like, don't date my mom. And he goes, I'll date her even harder. It's that kind of ended up becoming everything that the last 4 years was. And it was just it reminded me of home. That was because that's where I went when I was watching all of it. For people who don't know, that there were riots called the Black Monday riots back home that you can Google. It's pretty gruesome and horrifying. And these things happen every now and then. And when our riots happen, Hindus die, Muslims die, because that's usually what our riots are about back home. Is somebody finds out there is something that happened to a Muslim or a Hindu, and then a bunch of people come together armed and they fight and people die. So it was so weird watching people born in America fight democracy.
You're right.
Like, I never thought that would happen.
Yeah, they were fighting against democracy. You were absolutely
The
right.
thing they're fighting is, this is the system that you agreed on. So what you're angry about is the fact that your system worked and they elected a person. Like, that's the system we all agreed on when we formed this union. Like, that was the understanding. And it made me think about how much easily all these people got off. I mean, there was a guy who paid a counterfeit note, and because of that, his neck got held down against the gravel, and for 8 minutes, and he died, not being able to breathe.
And that's the thing, is we have to understand that, sorry to interrupt, but the absence of violence, and let's put it this way, like, I mean, yes, a cop was killed, and a lady was shot, and then other people died of medical emergencies, which can happen in these sort of violent events. But, like, you know, you think about what happened in Portland, in Minneapolis, in other parts of the United States during the summer, when people were protesting for Black rights, for people of color, for trans rights, for, you know, better conditions, you know, while this whole fiasco of a pandemic is being handled. And they were treated like, they would throw a half-drunk can of LaCroix at a cop and they would get their head stoved in. And in this case, yeah, you're absolutely right that, first of all, these people were against democracy. Secondly, we cannot separate the people who stormed the Capitol with white supremacy, in the sense that basically what they decided was that a diverse country made a choice, clearly, like, whether you agree with liberal democratic politics or not, you're right, Shashank, these are the rules in which the United States has set itself up, and according to those rules, a fair democratic election took place. And what they are basically saying is no, right? They're saying no to that democratic process. They're saying no to the diversity of choice, of those sorts of things. And I mean, I have my own personal criticisms against the US electoral process in general and the US state itself. But yeah, taking this just as a microcosm, these people, we cannot deny, were against democracy. They were white supremacists, and they're not going to get the same treatment that other members, real activist groups, are getting. And that's exactly the point. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
What was even more interesting watching was the next few days that transpired after the attack. And the FBI is supposed to be the FBI. When you say, like, police, you think the FBI, everybody in the world, because that's how they're kind of built up on. And that's the same for the US military. It's the only country to have ever used the nuclear bomb. Twice. And so when you think of that country and you think that their citadel of democracy was so easily taken down, it just shows you how fragile the process is. And I mean, if that was a bunch of black and brown people, man,
they'd all be dead.
They would be dead before they got up those stairs. And if this was exactly how it went, and they were all like gay and black and brown people, trans people, and they'd all taken up Hillary flags, Stronger Together flags from 2016, and then they had gone up there, they would have been, every one of them would have been dead before they touched the door that they broke through. So there's, of course, that double standard that everyone knows about. But I remember I was 9 years old when 9/11 happened. And I had just started getting into the habit of reading newspapers. And I would read every day that Indians and Pakistanis and people from the Middle East in America would get attacked. They would get beaten up on the road. A lot of sick people would get attacked. People would get killed. The one that comes to mind is, I think, a year or so after 9/11, a brown guy, I think from my state back home, was standing at the edge of the subway as the train was coming, and a lady just pushed him, and he died upon impact.
Jeez.
And the lady said, well, he looked like a terrorist, so I killed him, is what she said. Those were her exact words. And I don't see a similar kind of reckoning taking place where everybody's like, all right, like, let's throw our MAGA hats away. Like, this went too far. We saw where it went. Let's throw our Trump hats away. This was not, like, it's gone too far. Like, there isn't a social movement that is kind of putting the pressure on these people that was put on brown people back then. They said, oh, you're a Muslim, so it's you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know it's your fault. You did it. You knew who the terrorists were. There was a kind of naive understanding that every Muslim was somehow responsible for 9/11. But there isn't even the understanding that every Republican is somehow responsible for this terrorist attack. And I don't know why people are hesitating to call it a terrorist attack, because, like, that's what it is. It's a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
people
it was
died.
planned.
Yeah, it was planned. People died. It was illegal. It was done to terrify people who were voting to uphold democracy. So, like, that's the objective of terrorism, is to terrify people. And it terrified people. So, like, even the wording, it's like they're so soft and they're so kind when it comes to the way these people are being treated. And you'd think for a country that has so much, they would have a better hold on securing the place that their most important institution is held, but apparently not. And it was just, I'm sorry, I know we haven't talked a lot of Star Trek, but we're kind of just getting out the way we feel about everything that happened. But it did give me hope that they immediately went in and they did their job, which was to certify the election. I think people now should take a step back and look at just how long and drawn out this process is. There is just way too much happening.
Yeah.
And tempers are so high, like, you shouldn't wait this long. There shouldn't be these many steps to just certifying an election. There is already the steps that are taking place to actually vote. It's almost as if it's all designed to not let people vote, which, when you say it, makes no sense, but that's kind of what it has become. There are long lines when you vote. It's really difficult to vote. There's then the process of counting the votes. There's the process of taking that votes to their court to certify it. Then the courts kind of get together and they send their electors to the Electoral College to certify it. And then it has to go to the Senate. And like, it's just so many steps that no matter who gets elected, there is just so much room for error and so much space for trouble that, like, I think they should at least sit back and think about how big the process is. But, now, I think in a selfish way, the most comforting thing about all this, in a strange way, is now you can't deny it. Like, we saw the flags that went up there. Like, we all saw it, right? Like, every one of us.
Faces.
Yeah, we saw their faces. We saw what they were wearing. We saw what they were chanting. And the strangest thing was Americans going to fight democracy and the president of America saying, go for it. Like, that was giving them the green light. Like, it's stuff you can't make up. You just can't make this up. Like, and in Marvel, there is an organization called Hydra. And you find out in comics as you read them is that S.H.I.E.L.D., which is the organization that's supposed to be protecting you, actually has a lot of secret Hydra members. And Hydra is essentially the Nazi folks. They've come back to take over, right? Mm-hmm. So you're like, there's no way that could ever happen. That's so ridiculous. That's too much fiction. Like, calm down. And then we see it happen. So it's just those were kind of like my thoughts and feelings scattered all over, but I don't, and now I hope we have a country after the 20th.
Well, we're going to find out. And when this may be released a little after the 20th. So we'll be interested to see what this sort of sets as kind of like a milestone for just before, right? We are recording on, like, I think the 17th or something. So a couple things just to kind of talk a bit is, I think, first of all, the people who were storming the Capitol are a perfect example of people who have mistaken politics for culture wars, right? The idea that wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, and then all of the things around what Donald Trump says and what he sort of espouses, all of these things are imaginary, right? They're all ideas, they're all ideals. They're very sort of based in a very closed, siloed perspective, right? And the thing is these were exactly the people who it benefits, right? His system, and they identified themselves, right? They even said, we had your back at one point, now we don't, and all this. And I mean, there was rumors that they were trying to kill Mike Pence and all this other crazy stuff, but I think this is it's white supremacy masquerading as
Sorry
victimhood.
for interrupting you. It's not a rumor. There is video of people shouting, "Hang Pence," and they
Wow.
bought a noose.
See?
They set up a noose
Whoa.
in front of the Capitol.
I didn't even know this.
Yeah,
Holy crap.
you can find pictures of it. They set up
Disgusting.
a noose, like a guillotine. They made an execution ground, man. That people brought zip ties. I don't know if you saw the zip tie
I heard
guy.
about that.
So
Yeah.
the people, they bought their, of course, they were all armed. They bought their weapons.
Yeah.
So, like, again, the reason why you're not calling it a terrorist attack is because you built an entire visual and auditive culture that for so long has done everything it can to associate terrorism with brown people, because now you have to kind of work hard to change the conversation, and so you're using words like riot and insurrection.
And terrorist is a good name.
I mean, that's what that's the word you made in your language.
Yeah. Well, and what else? And I think about this too. What would they have done, right? And this is the point: is we didn't see the left that day, right? The left were guarding churches, the left were guarding community centers, they were guarding neighborhoods. They were on protection watch at that point because they knew that this was, two groups who were going to fight each other, and they didn't have to be a part of it. We have to understand very much so. Again, the level of violence that occurred in this shows kind of what needs to happen next in some cases regarding the United States and an inherent problem with white supremacy, right? The idea that these people felt that they were victims, that they were the downtrodden, that they were being persecuted. One lady even said, they're supposed to be shooting Black Lives Matter people, not us, not the patriots, and all this sort of stuff. You start to see that within their world are, complete separations from real material reality. And I think where this comes from, and you'd kind of brought it up, and I can't remember exactly where, but my Star Trek connection would be, the badmirals that exist within the fleets, right? These bad actors sitting directly next to good actors. And the only way you can find them is by finding out their deceitful behavior. And you're right. The Republican Party needs to take responsibility for what happened on that day. And I think the US state needs to take responsibility for some major issues that have become abundantly clear, right? The idea of how do we take care of people when they're sick? How do we deal with the inherent racism that could be baked into a system like the one we see? And I mean, here I'm saying, bad talking or saying these things about the United States critically, but these also apply to Canada. And I think also Canadians are smug to their peril by thinking that something like this couldn't happen here. I think that Canada is based on very similar principles that does benefit settler people of a European background. And you're very right, Shashank, in saying that we have been conditioned to see terrorism, quote unquote, as a brown people problem, when actually it's a huge problem among people who are white. As we go forward, and for the folks who did vote for Joe Biden and who are hopeful for something better, I guess my biggest question, and I will reserve any other conversation about this specifically now, my biggest question is where do you see this new administration? And I'm asking you this, Shashank, and purely to ask, where do you see this new administration tackling these issues? And what do you think its limits and procedures might have to be or should be? Like, where are you hoping things are going to go? What are your hopes moving forward?
Before I answer your question, I think Strange New Worlds doesn't do an episode where a group of people left Earth and they went and formed the Confederacy planet.
Ugh.
And it's a planet that's living. No, I think it's essential to do it. I didn't think it was until I saw a guy walk in with the Confederate flag into the Capitol, because there needs to be a conversation for a lot of people in an accessible and communicative way, which only Star Trek can do, to understand and discuss why the Confederate flag and the symbolism behind it are a problem. If you think about it, there are some shows or movies that people in America might have watched, but unless a show like Star Trek, which goes around the world, really tackles it in a way that you can understand it, you wouldn't understand it.
It's easy to disassociate that kind of imagery too. You're right. There was a lot of sanitization of the Confederate flag that took place in the 70s, right? You think of like Dukes of Hazzard.
Mhm. Yeah.
What's it? So the song, the guys who sang Leonard Skinner, right? That sort of stuff. And as much as those seem innocuous as TV shows and songs and stuff like that, we have to understand that they cast a country or a seceded country that fought on the side of slavery and was a white supremacist country, and it is a sanitization. And I'm not going to like poo-poo anyone. I don't know, if you watch Dukes of Hazzard and you listen to Leonard Skinner, I mean, I don't know you, so whatever, but like just know that it sanitizes white supremacy. Like that's just the long and short of it. And someone, you're right, with a Confederate flag walked into the capital of an enemy state, right? I mean, the Confederacy and the Union were enemies, and that would be like bringing a swastika into, say, like the French Parliament or something like that, or even the Berlin Reichstag today, right? It's an irrelevant,
The German
dated,
parliament.
yeah, well, it would have been, I think it's still called the Reichstag, but that idea that like that is a dead symbol and it needs to be dead,
Mhm.
and unfortunately it doesn't feel very dead. Neither of them do right now, and it's frustrating. But back to my question, is there, unless you want to cover anything else, where are you sort of hoping things go here? Are you looking for brutal crackdowns? Are you looking for rehabilitation? Are you looking for Joe just kind of pushing for social programs? Where you, sort of someone who fits within the liberal democratic paradigm of political understanding and everything like that, where do you see this going? What are your hopes?
Well, my biggest hope is that we don't have to follow his Twitter. That's
Yeah.
I know it sounds, again, on the surface, it's a funny thing that sounds humorous, but I don't want to look at a politician's Twitter, man. I don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning and think, what did he say in the middle of the night that pissed off someone important? And I don't think Joe will do that. I think the next 4 years, especially from that personality, all the celebrity of the president will go away. Like, I think it'll be a time of, at least from the White House, it'll just be a time of quiet. I think we'll go back to, and I can't wait for it, we'll go back to boring, long, complex discussions about the work that needs to be done. And I think now with the House, the Senate, and the White House under the Democratic control, I really think they'll make some progress with healthcare. I don't know if it'll get as good as Canada's is, but it will be significantly better than what it is now. I think they will. He's already ready to push for the $15 minimum wage, which again, when you make these positive changes, the work saves people. Like, people will stop talking about everything that happened when they realize, wait, I'm making more money than I used to. And companies are paying more taxes than they used to. This is great. Like, back when that's just how time has always worked. And the society has always worked, is that when you just do the work, I think lives will change and people will change. And I think that's what will happen with Biden. He's Jellicoe, and nobody's excited about having Jellicoe on the ship. But you know what?
Just called Joe Biden Jellicoe, and that's amazing.
You know what? I mean, the ships get monitored. It's quiet. People don't get into fights. It's just, you just sit and watch it unfold, and every now and then somebody will be asked to, like, hey, maybe don't wear that uniform anymore, wear a different uniform. Those things will happen. But the trick of it aside, I think it will go back to being quiet and boring and very nonchalant, very mundane. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 4 years we had national legalization of marijuana, which is like a whole different thing, right? Like, there are millions of Black people that have spent their entire lives in jail because of marijuana, while these guys get to go walk out and do what they did and then go back home like everything's fine.
A terrorist at the Capitol just on the 6th stole a riot shield, and there was an indigenous water protector who stole a riot shield at Standing Rock, and I think they're looking at 17 years.
We'll find out. And I think also, I don't think the charges would have been as severe had the election outcome been different. But with the new people coming in, I'm a lot more hopeful that they will be really brought to justice. and there'll be some really strong charges. So going back to these guys, I mean, I think it'll get much more intense. They're at this point they're building the case, so they're just finding the people to get them to court, and then eventually it'll get to that insurrection, sedition charges, which is when it'll get really interesting. But I don't know. That's what I think. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the kind of people who just want to do the work because they think work will save you and work will. If you do the work, people will come to you. It's like from the Bible, right? Like if you build it, they'll come. Like that's kind of what it is they'll get out of all this conversation about what Rosie O'Donnell's up to or what is going on the TV and what is CNN saying, what is Fox News saying. So, and they'll just do the work. And eventually the conversation will change to, hey, look at these things we're getting. Or it'll become, hey, look at these things we're getting and I'm not happy with it. So it'll go back to that kind of what it used to be in a way. But I don't know what, the thing that really worries me is that all these people, the 75 million that voted for this guy, they'll be here. I mean, and all this kind of failed because in a way they weren't as smart as they could be or as articulate as they could be. But if it was a much smarter, much more articulate person like Hitler, like Gul Dukat, who could, say the words and also do the actions that you need to do, I fear for the democracy in the long run. And hopefully it's just a fear and it never realizes itself. But what do you think? What do you think will happen in the next 4 years?
Well, obviously, coming from a slightly different ideological perspective, I appreciate your points, actually. And they've given me some really good hinges on which to kind of continue a dialogue on this that we can sort of carry out as we do more episodes and stuff. So I think that's good. And I just wanted to say at the beginning here, you're right about the possibility of someone with more charisma doing what Trump did better. And I think we have to watch out for that because the self-victimization of that group of people, along with their adherence to this sort of almost biblical culture war and their willingness to take on oppressions, right? They very much will be like, well, socialists are actually the real Nazis or feminists are the real misogynists and all this sort of stuff. I think that in that respect, they're going to be able to double down with a person who would be a little more articulate and quicker on the improv end of things than Trump was, because I think it is pretty clear that a number of those people who stormed the Capitol were in fact given a plan and had a plan. I mean, the dude with the piece of crap with the zip ties and stuff like that. I mean, he went with his mom. Like no one goes anywhere with their mom to like the Capitol without a plan. Come on. Also, his mom came along. Just let that sink in for a second, folks. Anyways,
I mean, when you take the humor out of it, it's still pretty funny, but
yeah,
it's intergenerational. It's something that's been deep-seated that is just taking a new avatar. Right? It's not something that's new that came up in the last 4 years. It's something that's been a part of some Americans. I don't know why they would call themselves American, but some of these people's lives for generations. So it's just like that's the real threat.
I'm worried that so a couple of things that I'm sort of looking at and where I'm kind of going with this is like the concept of a council presidency, I think, might be possible. Joe Biden is very old. And so I do sort of wonder how much fuel he's got left in the tank. I'm not going to say he's going to die before the end of his first term or something, but like he's an older man and will need more rest and all that sort of stuff. And like, if you look at what the presidency does to the faces of the presidents over like the 4 to 8 year period, like they age when they are president. And that's something that I've noticed. So I do wonder if we're going to see sort of a council presidency where there'll be a lot more Congress people and senators advising. I wonder what Kamala Harris's points are going to be. And talking a bit about Kamala Harris, I just want to really iterate this specifically and clearly to everyone that representation does not equal power. And as much as having a Black woman in the presidency or vice presidency is a form of representation, if there are still Black women starving, being treated terribly, if there are still a higher incarceration rate of Black people, people of color, you can have all the representation you want, but it won't equal power. it's something that I'm really happy about with Star Trek Discovery as well, is it has really leaned into this concept of not only representation but also giving power to those characters that that represent certain groups of people, groups of naturally born people. When Adira was very clear in saying, I use they, right? When you talk to me, use they. And they articulated it well. They were firm. When other characters heard, you saw click, acknowledge, and then it was never a problem again. And I think that's great. But like I said, as long as Black people are being incarcerated at a higher rate, poverty levels are higher, they're suffering from COVID more and getting affected more, people of color are not being treated the way they should be in an equitable society, any representation will not equal power. So I think that's one thing. I do sort of think a little bit about, you saying we saw it coming. I think we also saw this coming too, right? The idea that there would be a changeover from this. And I'm not necessarily terribly surprised that Biden won. And I think that we need to understand as well that, the changes that could be possible with healthcare, with how the pandemic is going to be handled. I guess like one thing I want to say right off the hob there is, boy, would I ever love to be the president after Donald Trump. To this degree also, it's like it's their presidency to lose at this point as well, just in terms of mainstream United States political politics. But in that respect, I think that we have to not forget that Standing Rock and Ferguson, the starting of uprisings from both Black and Indigenous people, happened under Obama's presidency, and he was not kind to them whatsoever. We also have to understand that overseas, Obama started a terrible bombing campaign that took place in Yemen. And I guess Trump didn't get as long of a time to exercise that. But I would be interested to see what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's foreign policy is going to be, especially against countries that they try to sheep dip every few years, like Venezuela, the sanctions on Cuba, and the escalating tensions against China. I worry that, you saying, this could be a bit of a boring presidency. Domestically, I think you're right. But in terms of foreign policy, I worry that there's going to be unsanctioned assassinations, attacks, and possibly a war starting, specifically against China. And I think that would be a gravely, gravely problematic thing to take place. The other piece of it that I want to really lay down is, I forget their name, but it would be like AOC and the other members of, I believe they're called the Squad. Forgive my Canadian ignorance on American politics, but they're pushing for this Green New Deal. And I think it's a great idea that we have some kind of change in our fundamental consumption. But I do have to say that if the Green New Deal is just basically adding a lithium battery to everything, we have to understand that lithium is usually forcibly expropriated from the global south, from countries like Bolivia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if the Green New Deal is purely just a new way to exploit and suck up natural resources that is carbon friendly in terms of its emissions, I want nothing to do with it. And so I hope that those things are brought into consideration and we find equitable ways to move forward in a sustainable manner. But I will say, as it stands right now, there's not really much I can say in terms of criticisms or anything, but just hope, I guess, is hope that people will get to have their voice a little bit more heard and things will move a little bit better. But I guess I'm not going to stop organizing in my own community and trying to help the people around me, no matter what. And I hope people continue to do that. Even if you did vote for Biden and expect things to move in a good way, this doesn't mean that we need to take things sitting down. We can go and help people. We can go and show what it is that's important to us. And I think helping one another is the number one thing we can do. And as Trek supporters and Trek fans, I mean, come on, that's what we do, right?
Speaking of Trek, let's talk about what you think will happen in the next few years in Trek. I know they've already started work on season 4 of Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I know Strange New Worlds is coming out. There's Picard season 2. There's Lower Decks. So a lot of Trek. Do you think there'll be any new stuff coming? Is there anything you're particularly excited about for 2021 and beyond?
Yeah. Well, the latest season of Discovery has really hit its stride. I mean, there were elements, like everyone's talking about the turbo lifts and it being so big. And yeah, I mean, it kind of reminded me of the beginning scene, the car scene on Coruscant in episode 2 of Star Wars. It was like, it seemed like that was as big of an area that we were dealing with. But I don't know. I mean, those little tiny idiosyncrasies are I mean, they're good talking points. I mean, it happened in I think it happened in Nemesis, where the amount of decks that the Enterprise had, or maybe it was First Contact. I can't remember, but these little idiosyncrasies and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not going to be too troubled. Where I'm really liking Star Trek moving is in its representation, right? We had an open-mouthed kiss between two gay men on Star Trek. Gay men played by gay men. That's pretty freaking awesome, right? Non-binary characters just being themselves, right? Exercising their inborn nature. I love the connection that they used with the Trill. And I really hope that for trans and non-binary people, that they can see the concept of the Trill as something they can connect to, right? Much like the Wachowski siblings did with the Matrix, right? The idea that there's something deep within me that makes me something more than what you might see. And a sort of a way to express your inborn nature, I think, is just a wonderful thing. I would love to see more of that. I would love to see more of their you talked about this a bit, I think, somewhere, about the concept of Afrofuturism and that being used for Book's character. I hope they just lean right into that, because it is the new frontier, right? I mean, we've seen what, sort of settler colonial space stuff would look like in the 60s, and then kind of what that post-Reagan space colonization would look like, and then going up into Deep Space Nine, and we kind of got that turned on its head, and we got to sort of see the side of the revolutionary with the Bajorans, and then fighting against the Dominion. So I'm really hopeful. I think that Star Trek has a unique place to make very strong political commentary, and I hope they don't pull any punches. So any series is fine. I just hope that they do the Trek thing and don't try to just sort of like have cool special effects and sort of half-baked storylines and stuff. Let's really dive in here. Let's get Trek people talking and thinking about what it means to be a good citizen and how we can move towards a society that's a lot more like the show we love.
And I'll keep pushing for this. It's still my number one need that I want out of Star Trek. I need a Ferengi show. Let's go. Let's make it happen. There's again, nobody will do it. It's a show that will be built around a mythology, a planet, a civilization that all works around money and consumption and capitalism and just making profit. I know it's a fictional place that doesn't exist, right? Like there's no way the planet we live on is that way. No, but like
we live on Ferengi.
Like it's just I wish somebody would figure out just a way to do a Ferengi show. I'll even take a comic book series. Speaking of comics, Trek comics have been really good in 2020. They are what got me through in a way with everything that was going on. That was one place that I could always go to. If you're interested, check out all my reviews on treknews.net. #plug. And definitely the comics have been really good, and I hope they keep doing what they're doing. Year 5 was great. We got a really nice tribute comic in a way for Odo. Keep going with the comics. Give me a Ferengi show. I know a lot of people enjoyed Picard season 1. The latter half just nosedived for me. It was not. I hope they do some work to get back from it. And right now it's the one I'm not as excited about as I am for Discovery season 4 and Strange New Worlds. I think Strange New Worlds it'll be a knockout. I think it'll really surprise people and get a lot more people talking about Trek than Discovery or Picard or the other shows managed to. I think Lower Decks will come back strong.
Yeah, Lower Decks was a real I really enjoyed that. It's unfortunate my partner is not a cartoon fan, but I'm it's okay. I don't mind. I really enjoyed watching it. I stole some time to do it, and I actually think I'll probably do a rewatch of Lower Decks pretty soon, because it was sort of just goofy, cute fun.
That's all I have, man. I think that will wrap up this episode. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good place to wrap up and just sort of signal our intent to all the fine listeners of PoliTreks that we're taking a few steps into coming back, and how that's going to look is maybe a little bit different, but I'm probably going to release this episode without really any editing at all, except for that part that I had to help open a can of chickpeas. So outside of that, I want to wish everyone a very happy new year, and I hope you're doing okay where you are. And if you aren't, make sure you look out for where you can find that help. One of the strongest things a person can do is ask for help when they need it. And if you feel like you don't have the means to do that, heck, hit us up on Twitter. I can see what I can even do to help you find links and connections to those people and groups and affiliations that can help us when we are in a time of need. And the other thing I'm going to leave you folks with is now is not the time just to sit in quarantine. If you are able to get up and out there and you're not at risk for contracting COVID as badly, or you have the right means from which you can protect yourself, try to get involved in some community organization. Try to make sure that you're helping people around you. They're the ones who you will find are sometimes in the most in need, and sometimes it can bring a lot of joy. So try to do that. And with that, I would say live long and prosper.
And onward to Star Saga.
PoliTreks is a production of Coconut Media Works. Executive producers Bill Smith and Dan Davidson. For even more great Star Trek discussion, discover the other shows of the Trek Geeks podcast network at trekgeeks.com or wherever you download your podcasts. Coconut!